Hello and welcome to the Exam Study Experts podcast. I'm delighted to be back this week with an all-new instalment of our ever-popular Student Stories series. Today, I'm joined by an inspirational scholar who achieved huge success academically as a young person, which helped him completely change his stars and rewrite his family tree. Born into, to use his words, a poor community in Guyana, his work ethic propelled him through a series of very hard-to-come-by scholarships to ultimately end up studying in America and eventually build a career as an extremely successful global leader in the pharmaceutical industry and more. His story hits hard for three reasons. Firstly, the sheer contrast between where he came from, where he ended up in his life, and how pivotal education was in that journey. It's a pretty remarkable and pretty inspirational tale. And put me in mind, for long-time listeners, you might recognize a similar trajectory from Joe's epic story way back in episode 18. So if you enjoyed Frank's tale today, do check out Joe's story as well for a parallel, really interesting parallels between those two examples. Secondly, in later years, Frank has reflected deeply on the power of perseverance. And in addition to telling us a little bit about his story, he's also here to share today some of his great wisdom on how we can all learn not merely to bounce back from adversity, but to bounce, as he says, bounce forwards, which I really like. So how to overcome adversity, bounce forward to the next thing, keep learning, keep growing. And thirdly, part of what Frank has had to come through his journey is, unfortunately, prejudice based on the colour of his skin. And this feels like a timely sub-theme to have running through today's episode, given that we are releasing this episode in October, which, as many of you might know, is Black History Month. So that felt quite apt at the moment. So wherever you are, whoever you are, I hope this episode intrigues, informs, and inspires you this week. I hope you enjoy. Dr. Frank Douglas, a very warm welcome to the Exam Study Expert podcast.
Well, thank you very much. It's delightful to be here.
We're very glad to have you here. Thank you for your time. I wonder if we could maybe just start. How do you normally introduce yourself? How do you normally describe who you are, what you've done, what you do?
Well, I am originally from Guyana. Grew up in very, I wouldn't say modest, actually poor circumstances. When I grew up, you had to pay to go to high school. Unfortunately, some friends of my mother came together and found the money for me to go to high school. I did so well the first year that I got a scholarship after that and have been on scholarships ever since, including after completing my A-levels for those of you in the British Commonwealth, the former British Commonwealth. I worked for about a year and a half, then received a Fulbright scholarship from the U.S. government and came to America in 1963. Why that is important, I arrived in America 8 days before the famous march of Dr. Martin Luther King in Washington, D.C. And in those 8 days, experienced discrimination based on the color of my skin. I later discovered that he had made this famous statement that one day he hoped that his children would be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. So I had experienced that. I did my bachelor's at Lehigh University, then went on to Cornell where I did a PhD, after which I went to work for Xerox. And facing discrimination there led me actually to leave Xerox and go to medical school. So I'm both a PhD and an MD, and trained in internal medicine and what is also called neuroendocrinology, and started my professional life as an academic physician, doing both lab work as well as clinical work. And I was discovered during that time by the pharmaceutical industry, and went to the pharmaceutical industry and started as a director. And within 3 years, I became senior vice president, responsible for research for the US for Ciba-Geigy. Today, it's actually Novartis. Unfortunately, about 3 years later, when my boss, who was the global head of research and development, retired, I was called to Basel, Switzerland headquarters. And it was explained to me that because of my ethnicity, although I was the likely successor, I would not get the job because of my ethnicity. That caused me to leave Ciba-Geigy and joined Marin Merrill Dow, a mid-sized global pharmaceutical company. And whilst I was there, I had the challenge. We were faced with losing one of our blockbusters, and I made an observation which led to the identification of Allegra and the development of Allegra in record time. That brought Marin Merrill Dow to the attention of Herx, who bought Marin Merrill Dow, formed Herx Marin Roussel, and turned to me, although I came from the smallest of the three companies that put together, to be the global head of research and development, which I remained in that position when it merged to form Aventis and retired in 2004 and returned to academia in 2004. So that is, in brief, my background.
Amazing. What a story. I'd love to explore some of the origins just a little more. I mean, the context as you were growing up, as you were being raised, you described it as poor, to use your words. Just tell us a little bit about what life was like in practice. Just give us a little bit of color on that.
Well, in practice, we lived literally in a one room of a house, and it was my mother and at that time three siblings, and my mother was a single mother, and as I explained to people, the way I did my homework, there was a garden, a public garden about a block away from where we lived, and that's where I went after school to do my homework because there was no place at home. I basically lived outside of our dwelling until it was time to come in and eat supper, then go to sleep. And I would go to sleep. Of course, as I tell people, the first time I slept in my own bed is when I went to college. I slept on the floor until I was 20. And it was, in fact, I laugh at it now, but I did not know what to do with the extra sheet that was on the bed until one of my college mates explained to me what you do with the blankets and the sheet, and that extra sheet on the bed. And so that is what life was like. I also grew up in the church, which I think in a way was my salvation because at age 12, I gave my heart to the Lord and became very active. In fact, became sort of a boy preacher at that time. And I think that helped me to then focus on my schoolwork. And in fact, I did extremely well in two exams. I actually placed first in Guyana in two exams, which was what brought me to the attention, I guess, of those who were looking to give scholarships to Guyanese. So that was my background. I spent a lot of my time basically, in the church and in school and of course outside of the home because it was just one room, so there was no place to really sit around.
And tell me about your drive to succeed and do so well in education. I mean, I'm presuming it didn't just sort of happen by accident. I presume you worked for it, and I get the sense you're probably quite a driven young man. Just tell us a little bit more about that drive and where it came from. I mean, you mentioned faith was a very important part of that. Yeah, just tell us a little bit more about what was sort of driving you to achieve at such a high level.
Yeah, as far as I can remember, everyone always said, "Oh, he's a very bright boy." I always remembered that. That's one. But when these two friends of my mother came together to pay for me to go to that first year. I had, to me, it was such an opportunity. I had to make sure that I made them proud of me. And so I just started studying, taking it seriously. And success breeds success. I suddenly found that I was being very successful. And in fact, at the end of that year, one of the teachers went to the principal and convinced the principal to actually skip me a grade so that I could take one of the exams a year early and be in line to get a scholarship to go to the top boys' school in Guyana. And I actually had the highest performance on that exam and went to what is called Queen's College High School, the top high school for boys in Guyana. And that basically just became part of life for me. Persevering, working hard, it just became. And one thing, as a matter of fact, that was drilled into me, which is part of the religious part, is to whom much is given, of him is much required. And that stuck with me. And although I did not understand it, it was clear to me that I was given certain talents. So therefore, I needed to return those by working very hard and sharing those, with my family and friends.
We have listeners in every corner of the globe, including some less privileged parts of the globe. What would your message be to anyone listening to this podcast today through the various channels on the podcast apps, on YouTube, wherever they've found their way to us? What would your message be to anyone growing up in sort of similar circumstances who feels they maybe have an aptitude to learn and to perform well in education? Yeah, what would your kind of message be to anyone in that situation?
It's very simple. It's hard work and perseverance. And I'll tell you a story that reinforced that. When I was in graduate school, and this was now in the late 60s, at a time in America, it was a time of a lot of demonstration against the Vietnam War. There was the Black Power movement, etc. And I was fairly active politically until the CIA visited me and brought an end to that. But it was recommended to me for me to take my PhD candidacy exam, which was an oral exam, a year earlier than is normally done. And in asking and seeking advice from the older students, they all told me that what I should do is I should basically visit each of the four members on my committee who would be examining me and ask their opinion. And three were non-committal, but one of them, who shortly thereafter actually became a Nobel laureate, so I'll tell you the caliber. He looked at me and he said, Dr. It's not Dr. Douglas at that time. He said, Mr. Douglas, you're not my impression of a student. And I said, yes. He said, because in my book, a student spends 8 to 12 hours a day studying, and I get the impression you don't spend 4. Because I hear that, you and one of your friends who work with me, you spend your time going downtown teaching people how to apply for food stamps instead of being in class. And so we had a conversation in which I was really quite distraught. And at the end of it, he said to me, we brought 30 of you into this class, and 1/3 of you will never get a PhD in chemistry at Cornell. Not because you're not bright. You're here because you're bright. But because you do not persevere, and when things get difficult, you don't work. It's all about hard work and perseverance. And I left his office, and that became my mantra. And even though part of that I worked hard and I persevered, it was at a different level. Even as an undergraduate in college, I didn't really work as hard as I could have. But in graduate school, it demanded something more. And I understood precisely what he meant. And so I stopped, and particularly after my visit by the CIA, I stopped my political activity and buckled down. And the message I give to everyone, it doesn't matter where you are, what you are doing, it is about hard work and perseverance.
So I guess of the two, possibly the harder one to put into practice is perseverance, particularly when things get tough, right? I mean, that's the where the rubber really meets the road. Can you keep going even when you're facing setbacks? You're not making the progress you want. You're frustrated. You're disappointed. Are there any tools that you've learned or that you might be able to share with us that how we approach and overcome those challenging times?
I'll tell you what my passion now is to basically to share with the people how one perseveres. And one of the things, I actually do have a podcast also, which is called Reframe for Resilience. Recently, I changed that podcast to the Anti-Fragility Reframe podcast. Nassim Taleb wrote a book, Anti-Fragility, in which he gives many examples in different fields. But the point he makes is resilience helps us to bounce back from stress or challenge. But what we really need to do is what I say, bounce forward to get stronger after a challenge. And so my focus has become, how do we look at a challenge or stress that we have and focus on becoming stronger because of that stress? How do we bounce forward? And so that's what my focus is. And there are some simple things, some of which I did to enable me actually to succeed. I've taken some of those lessons and put them into what I call my anti-fragility reframe methodology, because those were some of the things that I had practiced without even realizing their importance, except that they were working for me.
Are there any that, I mean, I'm sure it's quite a big subject, and I'm sure you've done a lot of thinking on this, but are there kind of a few simple ones you might be able to share a little of with us today, so we can sort of take some practical ideas away to apply to our own study?
Yes. Let me give an example. In fact, it's where all of this began. And I mentioned that I left Ciba-Geigy. I left Xerox. I left Ciba-Geigy later for another reason. But I left Xerox after I'd completed my PhD. I first had a job. And for 3 months when I joined Xerox, I could not get a good project. And one day, a young white man joined the group. And within a week, he was placed on one of the most exciting projects that we had at the time. So I went to talk with my boss. And I was just very stunned to see his expression when I said to him, Steve, don't think of me as though I am Frank. Think of me as though I'm Bob. And he looked at me and he said, you're right. Bob has been here a week and I've put him on the artery project. Well, I was furious. I ran out of his office, down to the office of the senior vice president to give him yet another example of my being discriminated against. Well, 2 years later, I'm sitting in medical school thinking about that episode and realizing that I had made 2 errors. The first error was that Dr. Tribus, the senior vice president, that summer had hired 3 young black PhDs, I being one of them, to join the one black PhD that Xerox had in research and development at that time. So it probably was more important to him that Frank Douglas would do well than it was to Frank Douglas. The second error I made is that I was not clear on what my desired outcome was. It was not for the senior vice president to go and have tough words with my boss. For heaven's sake, I was a freshly minted PhD. I wanted to show my stuff. I wanted to show people what I could do. So had I reframed, had I put it differently, and had I said to the senior vice president, Dr. Tribus, could you help my boss find me a good project? For heaven's sake, he was 2, 3 levels above my boss. He would have walked into his office. He would have said, find the man a good project. It would have happened yesterday. Now, in 2018, when I was writing my memoirs and writing that episode, I realized that I had actually learned from it. Because thereafter, starting in medical school, where I had lots of challenges, I began to look for what I called a better problem to solve when I had a problem. And so instead of focusing on my problem, I would try to find a problem that others were experiencing that was similar to mine, because I observed that if I went and discussed that problem rather than my problem, the supervisor or whomever would become engaged in that problem. And once they were engaged in trying to solve that problem, then I could say, and if you solve that problem, it would really help me. And, later, of course, after I was writing my memoirs, I began to call it my reframe methodology. So in the reframe methodology is that if you have a problem, one of the things is you need to be very clear on your desired outcome, not just for that problem, but think 2-3 years out. What's your desired outcome? And then also think about, broader benefit. If there were a solution, who else in your area, on your team could benefit? And try to find what I call the better problem to solve. That's your reframe. And another aspect of it is with the broader benefit, it gives you a chance now to be inclusive, namely to bring others in to find innovative solutions to the problem. So you go from the aggrieved I to the productive we. And, so that's sort of what I try to coach people and teams basically to do. Now, with respect to anti-fragility, is we ask the additional question. How would that make you or the team better or stronger, etc.? We give that additional challenge, which of course, and the whole part of it starts off with the reframing. You have to change perspective. You have to be prepared to look at the problem through different lens. And so shifting perspective is an important part of the reframe methodology that I discuss with people.
I think that's great advice. I think you can think of lots of examples of where you might find applications for that at various stages of learning in academia. I mean, that kind of conversation you were having with your boss's boss or whatever it was, that's the sort of conversation, whether it's about a racial issue, whether it's about some other form of, you feel you're not getting what you want from your program, particularly a sort of high level of academia, you're in a PhD program or something and it's not quite going right, you're not getting the support you need, whatever, that way of approaching it, that kind of quite constructive way of approaching it, having that clear end in mind, how can we have a broader benefit for everyone? Ultimately, I think in education, the majority of the time, the people that, are there supervising you, teaching you, mentoring you, they want you to succeed and it's in their interests for you to succeed. And so helping you succeed is very much in everybody's interests. Everybody's on the same page on that, the majority of times. So that's a really good starting point. And then, thinking about that better problem to solve rather than just going in there all guns blazing with your list of complaints. How can we have a constructive conversation about this? I love that phrase you used, could you help ... could you help, in this case, could you help my boss put me on a better project? Yeah, of course. That's a very concrete problem to solve. I can do that and that clear benefits for everybody. That's really interesting. Well, on that note, and conscious our time is drawing towards an end for today, but it's been so interesting hearing a little bit about your story, some of the practical things you've been working on in more recent years, reframing methodology and bouncing forward. I'll remember that phrase. I really like that. I wonder, we are going to be broadcasting this episode in Black History Month, October 2025. I wonder on that theme, we've had the theme running throughout the conversation, but I wondered if you had a message for our audience, for our listeners on that theme as we bring the conversation towards an end.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, for that theme, I think it becomes very important to remind young people particularly, that it's not enough to be resilient, to bounce back, but to bounce forward, to be anti-fragile, and indeed to do two things: to be clear on what is their desired outcome, not immediately, but 3-4 years from now, and how does that improve the lot of others, broadening benefit. That those two things are really very important. And if they have those two things, they are going to be able to better align their talents with the purpose of their life. And it will help them to find purpose of their life. And so that's the message that I would like to give them. And in fact, if you look at the many leaders with whom we have been blessed in the Black and Hispanic community, you can see those things, that they had clear vision about what needed to be done. They persevered with it. And it was not about them personally. It was benefit for others. It was benefit for others.
Absolutely. So powerful. Frank, thank you so much for today. It's been such a fascinating conversation. If people want to find out more about your work, books, podcast, the work you do, speaking, where would you signpost them to?
The Safe Haven Dialogues. And if they go to safehavendialogues-llc.com, that's our website. But look for safehavendialogues-llc.com, and they'll find a lot of our podcasts, our books, and courses, etc.
Phenomenal. Dr. Frank Douglas, thank you so much once again.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed the conversation.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Frank Douglas. Thank you so much for joining us today. Remember, if you get value from the podcast and you enjoy the work we do, please take a moment to support the channel by liking, subscribing, following, and sharing what we do. Your support is hugely valuable. And if you're on a platform that supports this, particularly YouTube and Spotify, do leave us a comment on the episode down in the comment section. We read them all and really enjoy hearing what you thought of the episode, things you're going to act on, things that related, things that resonated. And if you have particular questions, I will do my best to get to those as well. So thank you so much once again for tuning in this week, and I will look forward to seeing you again soon. Wishing you every success, as always, in your studies.